This is part 19, and so far when we started discussing section 378 of the Indian Penal Code, we have dealt with 4 ingredients, and now this is the time for us to know that if you take my property with my consent, you are not liable, and if you take property without my consent, you are liable. The consent, it's not only it is necessary for you to know what do you mean by valid consent or the consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code, but during course of time you will come across many sections where consent plays very important role. You do an act with the consent, you are not liable. You do an act without the consent, you are liable. So this is the time as a student of law that you must know what do you mean by consent as it is dealt by section 378 of the Indian Penal Code. Now, if you read fifth explanation, it says, the consent mentioned in the definition may be express or implied and may be given either by the person in possession or by any person having for that purpose authority, either express or implied. So it talks about what is meant by express or implied consent, but in this section, namely section 378, does not define what do you mean by valid consent or the consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code. Naturally, what you will do, you will immediately, as by this time you have mastered now the approach of learning law, you will go to the defining section. Now here it is not defining section but defining chapter, general explanation, and you will try to find out meaning of the term consent. And then if the meaning of the term consent is not dealt as far as general explanations is concerned, then you will refer to the provisions of the General Clauses Act of 1897. If it is not, you will refer to any standard dictionary. So this is general approach, to which now this is an exception. And what is an exception? In order to know what do you mean by valid consent or the consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code, it's not general explanations, but when we will start dealing with general exceptions right from section 76 up to 106 of the Indian Penal Code, when you come across section 90, you understand what is this consent or what is this valid consent or the consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code. Now this consent, definition of the consent as dealt by section 90 of the Indian Penal Code, this is the only exception. The consent is not defined by general explanations, but the consent is defined by general exception. And what is the importance of this consent, with which we shall be dealing in detail when we also deal with general exceptions, no doubt about it. But then this is the time for us to understand consent, and then as you start reading 90, you come to know consent is defined in negative terms. Consent known to be given under fear or misconception. And then to understand this section, section 90, classify this under 5 ingredients. And if the consent is obtained as per any one of the 5 ingredients which are enumerated as per section 90 is concerned, then it can be said that it is not done with the consent of an individual. And what it says, first of all, it says a consent is not such a consent as is intended by any section of this code if the consent is given by a person under fear of injury or under misconception of fact, and if the person doing the act knows or has reason to believe that the consent was given in consequence of such fear or misconception. In other words, if the consent is given under fear of injury, that is not at all a valid consent. Naturally, it will immediately click you, or you will try to find out, sir, what is this injury? The meaning of the term injury as it is used in day-to-day life is bodily pain. Say if somebody was playing a game of cricket, he had a fall, or football or hockey, he had a fall, then what we say, he had a fall and thereby he was injured. But what is the meaning of term injury as far as the Indian Penal Code is concerned is entirely different as far as the meaning of the term as it is understood in day-to-day life. So how to find out meaning of this? To know section 90, to know section 378, you must know section 90. And in order to know section 90, first of all, if the consent is given under fear of injury, that is not at all a valid consent. But what is this injury? And in order to know the meaning of the term injury, as you start reading right from section 6 up to section 52A, general explanations, you come across section 44. And what is section 44? It defines injury. And it says, the word injury denotes any harm, whatever illegally caused in body, caused to any person in body, mind, reputation or property. So what is this? The word injury denotes any harm, whatever illegally caused to any person in body, mind, reputation or property. Now this is the time to understand injury. Go back to the illustration. The book is kept on the table in front of me. Somebody, Mr. Z, enters and then he says, give this book to me, otherwise I will attack you. I say, please don't attack me, take away the book. I myself pick up the book and hand it over to him. Can it be said that he has moved that book with my consent? So, we modify the situation. He enters and he says, give this book to me, otherwise I will set fire to your building. I said, don't set fire to the building, take away the book, and the book is given to him. Can it be said that he has taken that book with my consent? Third situation. He says, give this book to me, otherwise I will go and attack your relative at your home. Maybe daughter, maybe wife, maybe son. I say, please don't do that. And what I do, you take away the book. And I hand over the book to him. Can it be said that he has taken that book with my consent? And lastly he says, gentlemen, give this book to me, otherwise I will harm your reputation. I will start defaming you in a public at large. I say, please don't do that. And I hand over the book to him. Can it be said that he has taken that book with my consent? In all these situations, he has got that book by putting me in fear of injury. Why to say? In the first case he says he will attack me, so there is likely to be harm to my body. In the second case he says he is going to set fire to my property, there is harm to my property. In the third case he says he is going to do wrong with respect to my relative. No harm to the body, no harm to the property, but harm to the mind. And lastly he says that he is going to defame me, so it's harm to my reputation. Come to section 44, which says, the word injury denotes any harm, whatever illegally caused to any person in body, mind, reputation or property. So if he has taken book in such a manner, it can be said that he has taken the book under fear of injury, and hence he has not taken that book with my consent as per a section 2, and hence this is a time if the consent is given under fear of injury, and if the person doing the act, that person who has taken the book doing the act knows, or he has reason to believe that the consent was given in consequence of such fear. If he would not have put me in fear, I would not have parted with the book. He has got reason to believe. And now we come across one more term. What is this reason to believe? And in order to understand this reason to believe, as we start reading section 26 as far as general explanations is concerned, it says, a person is said to have reason to believe a thing if he has got sufficient cause to believe that thing, but not otherwise. So this is reason to believe. What do you mean by reason to believe? A person is said to have reason to believe a thing if he has got sufficient cause to believe that thing, but not otherwise. So this is a case where he has taken that book. He has taken that book without my consent. Though it is given by me, it is taken from me by having what is known as a wrongful consent, not a valid consent or the consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code. Now second part, as far as this is concerned, second, we call it second ingredient. He enters. He tells me that, well, gentlemen, give this book to me, I shall return this book within a period of 2 days. And then at the time when he tells me that he is going to return book for within a period of 2 days, he, at the time of taking the book itself, he has no desire, he has no intention, he has no, absolutely no, he never wanted to return that book to me. And then this was not known to me that he doesn't want to return the book to me. I give book to him and he has taken away the book. Can it be said that he has taken that book with my consent? The answer is in negative, because what he has done in this case, as we have started learning first part, as far as section 90 is concerned, consent known to be given under fear of misconception. What he has done, he has taken, when you obtain a consent because of what? Because of misconception, that is not at all a valid consent. Now what he has done, he made me to believe that he is going to return the book, he intends to return the book. Actually, in fact, he never wanted to return the book. If this fact would have been known to me, I would not have parted with the book. So he has got that consent. If you have consent which is given by a person under misconception, that is not at all a valid consent as far as section 90 of the Indian Penal Code is concerned. So in this case, if he has taken the book by telling me that he is going to return the book, actually in fact he never wanted to return the book, what is the manner in which I have parted? I have parted when I was under impression I will get back the book, but he has taken away he wanted to take away the book, but this is the method that he had adopted by telling me that he is going to return the book, but actually in fact he doesn't want to return the book. That is his liability. So what do you say? In such a case, he has taken book. So if the consent is given under fear of injury, that is not at all valid consent. If the consent is obtained under misconception of fact, as in this illustration, we shall be dealing with this, the manner in which a person is deprived of his property determines criminal liability. That also we will discuss when we will try to compare section 383 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines the offence of extortion, with that of cheating, which is defined by section 415 of the Indian Penal Code. But this is this is consent obtained under fear of injury is not valid consent. Consent obtained under misconception of fact is not at all a valid consent. With this, as we proceed to section 90, this says consent of insane person. If the consent is given by a person who, from unsoundness of mind or intoxication, is unable to understand the nature and the consequence of that to which he gives his consent. In other words, if the consent is given by a person who was intoxicated, or if the consent is given by a person who was a person of unsound mind. Now, intoxication can be a defense. Insanity can be a defense, with which we shall be dealing as these general exceptions are concerned. But this is, this is the time for you to remember only one thing. If the consent is given by a person when he was a person of unsound mind, and his unsoundness of mind was of such a nature that he was unable to understand the nature and the consequence of the act to which he gives his consent, that is not at all a valid consent. If the consent is given by a person who was intoxicated, and he has that degree of intoxication because of which it was not possible for him to, he was unable to understand the nature and the consequence of that to which he gives his consent. So if the consent is given, that has been qualified, no doubt about it. But if the consent is given by a person who is a person of unsound mind, or if the consent is given by a person who is intoxicated, that is not at all valid consent as far as section 90 of the Indian Penal Code is concerned. So if the consent is given under fear of injury, if the consent is given under misconception of facts, if the consent is given by a person who was intoxicated, if the consent is given by a person who was a person of unsound mind, that is not at all a valid consent as per section 90 of the Indian Penal Code is concerned. With this we come to the last ingredient, as I told you, consent of child. And it says, unless the contrary appears from the context, if the consent is given by a person who is under 12 years of age, is not at all a valid consent. So what it says, if the consent is given by a person who was under 12 years of age, that is not at all. Now why this is 12 and why not 13? Why not 11, with which we shall be dealing when we deal with two general exceptions, namely when we shall be dealing with section 82 and section 83, which deals with act of a child as a defense. There we will learn. Section 82 says nothing is an offense which is done by child under 7 years of age, and section 83 says nothing is an offense which is done by child who is above 7 years of age, under 12 years of age, who has not attained sufficient maturity of understanding to judge the nature and the consequences of his conduct on that particular occasion. There we will learn that it entirely depends upon the state of the mind of an individual. And here what it says, in general, if the consent is given by a person who is under 12 years of age, he is not in a position to know the natural and probable consequences of the act to which he consents, and hence that is not at all a valid consent, or the consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code. But if you start reading the wording, this has been qualified, and it says, unless the contrary appears from the context, if the consent is given by a person who is under 12 years of age. So if contrary doesn't appear in the context, consent given by a person who is under 12 years of age is as it is not at all valid. In other words, consent given by a person who is above 12 years of age is valid consent. But once we start dealing with the provisions of the Indian Penal Code, for example, especially when we will deal with section 375 of the Indian Penal Code, and when we will come to the sixth ingredient, there we will learn with or without her consent when she is under 16 years of age. So sexual intercourse by a man with a woman under 16 years of age is not at all, when she is under 16 years of age, consent given by such a woman is not at all valid consent. This is the contrary. General age is 12. But as when you read section 375, you come to know that this is not at all with or without her consent when she is under 16 years of age, as dealt by sixth ingredient as far as section 375 is concerned. When we shall be dealing with section 361 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines the offence of kidnapping from lawful guardianship, which says, whoever takes or entices any minor under 16 years of age, if male, or under 18 years of age, if female. So here the age of male or female whose consent becomes relevant and material is in case of male under 16 years of age, or in case of female under 18 years of age. No, so it's not 12. This is the contrary that appears in the context. So this is the time for you to understand. In general, consent given by a person who is under 12 years of age is not at all a valid consent. If it is given by a person who is above, this is in the, as I told you, this is in the negative form. The positive form of it, if the consent is given by a person who is about 12 years of age, is valid consent. But then naturally, along with this, mind well, this is what this has been qualified, unless the contrary. So there are some sections where the age of the consent has been extended, has been raised. For example, in case of rape, it is 16. As we shall be dealing with exception in case of wife under 15 years of age. There is also one age to which I want to draw your attention during course of time. We shall be working out. We shall be dealing with consent every now and then, no doubt about it. But now, I mean, it may not be possible. When I say consent, you must know. Valid consent, yes. It is not given under fear of injury. It is not given under misconception of fact. It is not given by a person who was a person of unsound mind. It was not given by a person who was intoxicated. And it was not given unless the contrary appears. It was not given by a person who was under 12 years of age, as far as section 90 of the Indian Penal Code is concerned. So this is exactly, if you take my property without my consent, you are liable. If you take my property with my consent, you are not at all liable. So this is the last ingredient as far as section 378 is concerned. With this, now come back and start, reading section 378, which says, whoever intending to take dishonestly any movable property out of the possession of any person without that person's consent moves that property in order to such taking is said to commit theft. So these are the 5 ingredients. What is the first explanation to the section? The first explanation to the section says, a thing, so long as it is attached to the earth, not being a movable property, is not the subject of theft, but it becomes capable of being the subject of theft as soon as it is severed from the earth. The illustration which I had given regarding tree. Second explanation says, a moving effected by the same act which effects the severance may be a theft. Third explanation says, a person is said to cause a thing to move by removing an obstacle which prevented it from moving, or by separating it from any other thing, as well as by actually moving it. The fourth explanation says, a person who by any means causes an animal to move is said to move that animal, and to move everything which in consequence of the motion so caused is moved by that animal. And the last explanation says, the consent mentioned in the definition may be expressed or implied, and may be given either by the person in possession or by any person having for that purpose authority, either express or implied. So this is, with this now, it is also, as I told you, must for you to read the illustrations which are given at the end of this section. And as you go on reading the illustrations which are given at the end of the section, you shall be in a position to understand in detail as to what do you mean by theft, which is defined by section 378 of the Indian Penal Code. With this now, there may be a situation where the property is in possession of wife, clerk or servant. And then if the property is in possession of wife, clerk or servant, if such a property is taken, what is the liability? And then for that, if you read section 27, which says, when property is in possession of a person's wife, clerk or servant, on account of that person, it is in that person's possession within the meaning of this code. So it shall be taken for granted, it is taken for granted that it is in possession of that person's possession. And explanation says, a person employed temporarily or on a particular occasion in the capacity of a clerk or servant is the clerk or servant within the meaning of this explanation, within the meaning of this section as far as section 27 is concerned. So this is with respect to what happens when the property is in possession of clerk is made clear as far as section 27 of the Indian Penal Code is concerned. With this now, as I told you, during course of time, we may be coming across many situations where we'll try. This is one way. A movable property you can be deprived of your movable property by committing the offence of theft, as it is defined by section 378 of the Indian Penal Code. Yes. But during day-to-day life, you can come across many situations, and then it is only the application of the ingredients. Only master the ingredients. By and try memory by association. Take into consideration the illustration, and with the help of the illustrations, if you can remember the ingredients. Once you remember the ingredients, it's very easy for you to understand the section with which we are dealing. Now think of a case where Mr. A left the restaurant by keeping some coin in a dish as a tip to the waiter. and then when he left the restaurant, Mr. A left the restaurant, B came, he sat over there. He had no money to tip to the waiter, so the coin that was kept in a dish as a tip to the waiter was kept by him in the pocket. And after eating everything and after doing everything, he kept again the same coin in a dish as a tip to the waiter. What is his liability? Now his liability can be understood provided you have understood the ingredients with which you are dealt. As soon as the coin is kept in a dish as a tip to the waiter, now, and person has left the restaurant, the coin which is kept in a dish as a tip to the waiter on the table, it becomes property or is in possession of the waiter. And when it is in possession of the waiter, the other person who enters the restaurant, if he has taken the coin with idea of returning the coin, no doubt about it, but as soon as he picked up the coin is a movable property, it was in possession of the waiter, he moved the property out of the possession, he moved the property without the consent, and his intention was dishonest at the time of moving the property. Hence what we say, all ingredients of section 378 of the Indian Penal Code are fulfilled and he is liable for the offence of theft. So section 378 of the Indian Penal Code defines the offence of theft. Right from section 379 up to section 382 are the sections which deal with punishment. Now you may, I don't have any objection. I don't say no, yes, by all means you can go through this. But then let me tell you, it may not be possible for me to go through each and every section dealing with punishment. For example, section 379 deals with punishment for theft. It is general section which says, whoever commits theft shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for term which may extend to 3 years or with fine or with both. Section 380 says theft in dwelling house, and it says whoever commits theft in any building, tent or vessel, which building, tent or vessel is used as a human dwelling or used for the custody of property, shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for term which may extend to 7 years and shall also be liable to fine. Section 381 says theft by clerk or servant of property in possession of master, and says whoever being a clerk or servant or being employed in the capacity of a clerk or servant commits theft in respect of any property in possession of his master or employer shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for term which may extend to 7 years and shall also be liable to fine. And the last section 382 as far as the punishment is concerned says theft after preparation made for causing death, hurt or restraint in order to the committing of the theft, and it says whoever commits theft having made preparation for causing death or hurt or restraint or fear of death or of hurt or of restraint to any person in order to the committing of such theft or in order to the effecting of his escape after the committing of such theft or in order to restraining of property taken by such theft shall be punished with rigorous imprisonment for term which may extend to 10 years and shall also be liable to fine. So these are the sections which deal with punishment, and hence during course of time, as I told you, our concentration will be on that section of the Indian Penal Code which defines an act which amounts to an offence. We will not go through the sections which deal with punishment, because once you understand the offence, the quantum of the punishment depends upon who has committed the offence, under what circumstances he has committed will determine the quantum of the punishment. That you can easily understand by having a reference or mere reading of the section which will serve the purpose, and that will also in the fitness of the things. With this now, we proceed to the illustration, namely the person entered and then he had put me that in fear of injury and compelled me to part with the property. Now what is his liability? And the liability of the person is for the offence of extortion, with which we intend to do in the next part of our series of lecture is concerned, and that is we shall be dealing with extortion as it is defined by section 383 of the Indian Penal Code. Now, in order to understand section 383, you have to read section 383, no doubt about it. But for the purpose of understanding 383, you will have to have a reference back. So do carry out research as to which are the terms to which we shall be coming across in order to understand section 383, and you will have to have a reference to general explanations. And then once you have done homework, it will be, as I told you, always easy for you to understand as far as the next part is concerned, with which we shall continue during course of our time.